Why, hello, and welcome back to another episode of Voice of the Rings. I am your host and guide, Zolan Ironshield, here on Voice of the Rings, and here's another fireside chat for you guys today. We are going to be talking about canon, and we're going to be doing it in a fun and uplifting way. There's a lot of stuff going on recently with canon. I'm going to try to get to the point quickly, but I have to throw down some definitions that we're going to talk about. I want to first talk about definitions of what the word canon means, and in particular, canon based on fantasy fiction and just writing, sci-fi, writing in general, okay? We're going to be talking about that. We're going to just break apart some of the, there's a lot of stuff going around the last couple weeks. I've been watching a lot of stuff for, I don't know, it's been ever really since, like, in particular with Tolkien content, since I'm a Tolkien channel here on Voice of the Rings, we're going to be directly focusing on this. And is there really Tolkien canon? Is there a real solid canon? That's what we're going to break down today, all right, on this particular episode. I'm going to try to get right to the point in the first few minutes of the video here. But before that, again, I've got to lay down a few groundwork because you need to understand the premises that I'm talking about. Because one thing that I see is happening a lot with the term canon is that it has many people are using it in different ways, okay? So we have to be on the same page on what we're talking about. So I'm going to define fantasy canon, okay? So something that I am seeing is there is a little difference to the word has kind of evolved in the last about 100 years when it comes to talking about canon, when it comes to like a sci-fi or a fantasy series. It's very different thing than canon talking about maybe like biblical, right? Like with scripture or something like that. It's a little bit different, so that can be a little hard. But I will tell you right now, this has been on my mind for many weeks now, because it's been talked about since like the Rings of Power series has been out. It's really been discussed on all the platforms and Twitter, and lots of other people have talked about it. And I just want to get to the bare bones bottom of this conversation. I really want to talk about, is there really Tolkien canon? And the real quick short answer is there is. And there's a way we can do it like kind of objectively without having our own emotions involved, because that is something that's really been happening. Like people are like battling over this. One side's like, yeah, there's canon. The other side's like, well, our definition is, well, we're talking about it from this perspective. No, there's not. We can do whatever we want, blah, blah, blah. We're not going to get into that crazy with like, we're going to keep this uplifting and a fun video today, because my Hearthside talks or Fireside talks here, I like to just focus in details on it. You're welcome to disagree with me or agree with me and leave comments, and I would love to hear why, okay, in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you would, be great. But first, you got to enjoy the video, so let's get into it. So, a big thing when it comes to canon is I'm going to be directly talking about like canon when it comes to fiction or sci-fi or fantasy. That's a big one. So there's a couple different definitions. Let's talk about the definition of the word canon when it relates to fiction and fantasy. There's a lot of stuff going around that, oh, it's not really the right, the word has a lot of different meanings, blah, blah. Well, and people are probably using it in different ways, okay? But we're going to talk about the definition that we're going to be using today. And then at the end of the video, I'll talk about the mix-up maybe with other people using different, not quite understanding what canon really is. I get a lot of comments like that from you guys when I make comments about canon. And I'll also give you how I approach it and my thoughts at the end of the video. Let's start with the hard, factual, is there canon, okay? Well, here is one of the definitions, okay, of canon. In fantasy fiction, the term canon refers to the body of works that are considered to be the official or authoritative works within a fictional world, okay? Canon works are usually created by the original author or developer of the fictional world. Okay, I need to break this down, okay? This is what we're going to focus on today. We'll talk about later in the video the other definitions of like the original term for canon, and it has actually many meanings in many different walks of life and different things. We're focusing on the fantasy version here because this whole video is about, is Tolkien have canon? Okay, now we got to break up one thing real quick too before I finish the thought on this. So basically this is considering the original author. Some people consider the person who owns the rights to a franchise to be the one that makes canon, okay? Now, in theory with canon, since it's so loosely used all the time, this can be the case too, but I'm going to argue against that being the exact official version in the fantasy canon in a moment, okay? And I'll explain this all why. So try to stay with me. There's going to be a few things of thought here I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to try to break them down in a way that you guys can all follow, and then leave your comments to discuss, because it's going to be fun. So the next thing is sometimes people will say, well, it's only the published works, right? So for example, the author published his works, right? So let's say only real Tolkien canon in their terminology and thought would be things that Tolkien published, okay? So maybe his notes don't really count as like the hard canon, right? Those are just his other thoughts, right? Some people will argue like that too, okay? So these are a couple different thoughts and ways to look at it, all right? These are all good ways to look at it. I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong. I also want to tell you guys that I'm not going after anybody, okay? Just so everyone knows, this is a fun video. This is a conversation, okay, to talk about this. But I am trying to get to the bottom of it because it's really been on my heart to really think about it, because as a Tolkien channel myself, Voice of the Rings, I do voiceovers, yes, but I also am a voice for Tolkien, okay, on things. Now, does that make me this authoritative figure? No. That's why we're going to be using the definition just in the dictionary, okay? So again, I read you the definition of the Sci-Fi version. So again, let me read it one more time. Canon works are usually created by the original author or developer of the fictional world, okay? And I think the reason they say usually is because there's probably some little exceptions here and there. And again, there is some gray area slightly. But what is solid for me and many other Tolkien lovers and readers and sci-fi, fantasy, fiction, whatever it is, okay, I'll give other examples at the end of the video. We do know for sure there is solid Tolkien canon. In my mind, okay, from this description, solid Tolkien canon from the description is anything kind of the brainchild, in another way to word it, of the original author, what he wrote in his notes or anything. I would also add in his son, because his son worked so closely with him in talking about Tolkien canon, okay? Now, again, some people might disagree with that slightly, but I feel that Christopher Tolkien made it very clear he tried really, really hard to not change his father's fictional works, okay? He took the notes and put them together. He filled in a few holes, but really Christopher Tolkien did so much to finish publishing a lot of things of his father's notes, and also filled in a couple gaps himself, that I feel like he really fits in with being like the original author too, being his son and working with him so closely over Tolkien's life, okay? So canon definition, all right, is, and I'll give you my thoughts in a minute on this, but the definition of canon is the original works and brainchild, whatever you want to call it, of the author. Now, what does this entail if we have this definition? And now we have a solid base and premise and the definition from the dictionary that we can all be on the same page, okay? And again, you guys might have exceptions with what I'm saying here. That's just fine. I'd love to hear your comments. Like the video, dislike, whatever. But put those comments in there. I would love to see them. I'd love to see different thought and discussion on it. So, when it comes to this main term then, what would be considered the actual Tolkien canon? Well, to get to the main point, the actual Tolkien canon would be anything the author wrote. Now, some people would argue that, well, he changed stuff all the time himself. He was, changing things. He had many thoughts all the time, many different things he thought about. Well, that's good and fine. But guess what? Everything Tolkien wrote and everything he did is canon. Now, on a side note, I approach something as whatever his final word was on something, or what he finished writing on something. Like, so for example, he had multiple versions of something. Whichever one he wrote last and said, this is the one I publish, or this is the one that I think I'm going to stick with, that is like the one we should officially take. Now, in my mind, any of those variations, for example, like, the Blue Wizards, this is a good example, coming to the Middle Earth at different times, he changed it later. I think, for example, either of those are canon. They're just two alternate versions of what Tolkien wrote. Now, here's where some people, I think it's really hard it gets into the mud a little bit, but when it comes to changing canon, the only person who can change canon or make more canon is the original author. Okay? So that's really the answer to what is canon. It's anything Tolkien wrote, okay? I would say his official published things go over his notes, right? As the direct canon, because that's what he published, right? But any of his notes are also canon. Or even if it's different versions that maybe even contradict each other, depending on which one, they're both just alternate versions of canon because the author wrote it. Okay? Are we all on the same page on the description and then the definition of canon? Okay? So this has been really important to me. I've really been wanting to talk about this with you guys. So now, with that in mind, let's break this apart a little bit more. So what is, for example, if we use another, real quick, if we pull in another thought here, for example, if someone has the rights to something, okay? Let's say, for sake of the video, it is Amazon. They're sold the rights to make the Rings of Power series. Can, from our definitions, things that Amazon makes up be canon? They could be chronological with canon. They could fit in, but can they be really canon with the definition we just made? All right, if they're not using the exact version of something story-wise that Tolkien wrote, can it be canon? All right, I would argue no, it can't be canon. This goes for any video game, this goes for anything. And now your next question is, well, Zolan, can canon ever be changed or edited at this point? Since obviously our lovely, wonderful Tolkien and Christopher Tolkien are passed away and in heaven now? No. The answer is no. There's no more canon that can be added at this point. Canon can only be adjusted or fixed by the original author definition. Okay? They can only be fixed by the original author. All right? So at this point, we can never get any more official canon. And now I know what you guys are thinking. You're like, well, what if someone owns it? Well, we already talked about that. If someone has bought the rights or owns it or this or that, or even, now later family members of Tolkien or whoever, they can't really officially change canon according to this definition. Okay? This doesn't mean they can't add to the story in good ways, right? And now that's something I'm going to talk about. Save that thought for the later in the video. I'm going to talk about how I break apart and approach canon versus additions or new writings. Okay? We're going to talk about that. Or let's say, video games like Lotro or Return to Moria or whatever. Things that do good, bad, whatever. Even Rings of Power. Okay? We're going to talk about that more in a second. But this is all what you have to keep in mind when it comes to canon with fantasy. All right? With fantasy and story writing canon. We're going to tell you why it's a little confusing and why I think a lot of people don't really know when they're using the term canon. They're not, everyone's using like having different thoughts in their head what canon means. So now that we're all on the same page, let's talk about the comment that is a big one with Corey Olsen, right? Made a comment. He calls himself the Tolkien professor, right? And when it comes to this subject, okay, I think he's a nice guy. I don't really know that much about him personally. I've never talked to him, never met him. I would love to talk with him and meet him. It'd be fun. I'd love to have conversations about this. But what happened was, and I will link this in the description, okay? He also has a follow-up video. There was a little post about him saying a certain line, which is where all this came from, okay? I'll break this part. I'm sure most of you know this already, so, you can just skip a few seconds or just wait a second. He made the comment that there is, I want to say the exact wording. All right, so just so I don't say anything out of context with the wording here, he said, first thing to specify is that there's no such thing really as canon in Tolkien, okay? He said Tolkien's ideas were ever evolving. All right, so now here's a thing. The video on Twitter was heavily edited. We don't really know the full context of what he was talking about in the moment. So I was hesitant to just go after this because I was thinking, well, this may be some specific question that he's building on, and he doesn't really necessarily mean exactly what this wording sounds like taken out of context. Okay? So now, if we were going to take this sentence at face value with knowing no context, which, by the way, he has a follow-up video he did after that, talking about what he really was talking about. I'll also link that in the description for him. Okay? He basically, let's take this at face value. There's no such thing, really, as canon in Tolkien. So at face value, I completely disagree with this from our definitions of what we already know from the dictionary with comes to canon. There absolutely is canon. But he is almost in the thought pattern here of the other versions of canon, which again, we're going to talk about in a moment, where he said Tolkien's ideas were ever evolving. Yes, Tolkien's ideas were evolving. I agree with him on that. That was a very real thing. And what he's saying is if there was a linear story plot line, but Tolkien kept changing things because he was inventing his own story at the time. That is 100% true. I agree with that part. But when it comes to there's no solid canon, I believe that, well, not just what I believe, the definition. I'll talk about what I believe in a moment. We'll go into my personal thoughts in a moment. There is absolutely solid canon. It's anything the author wrote, even if there's multiple versions that were evolving and he was changing as we go. Anything he wrote in his sphere, Tolkien's sphere of influence, is canon. We just talked about that in detail, right? That would be the official canon. So at face value with this sentence, I would disagree. Okay? There's no such thing really as Tolkien canon. There is absolutely real, solid Tolkien canon. Okay? But again, not going after Corey Olsen on this. I don't know the rest of this conversation, okay? And again, I've watched you can watch his follow-up video and see that down there as well if you want to check that out. But again, we're talking about this statement because this is the one that got so publicized. Words today. But again, he makes the comment that Tolkien's ideas were ever evolving in that same little clip. So it makes me think that he was talking about a particular subject. And if we asked him exactly what Tolkien canon is, and is there a Tolkien canon, I would assume he'd say yes, like what we've just been talking about with the definition of what canon is when it comes to any writer of fantasy, sci-fi, or fiction. Okay? But I just want to talk about that because that's really important because that's kind of where a lot of this started recently. But it wasn't just from that. Really, this whole conversation has been happening ever since season 1 of Rings of Power came out, okay? And it's also there's a parallel happening here, which I'm just going to bounce this off real quick. So try to keep following me here. With Star Wars, okay? A lot of people say with Star Wars, right, that, now they've changed the canon because Disney owns Star Wars, okay? And in that terminology of what they're saying with canon, okay, they're saying the main story plot is what they mean by canon. But I think it's misleading to use the term canon in that way. I believe, if you apply this to Star Wars, the only person who can change or make the original canon for the term in a sci-fi story is George Lucas. That's it. Now, he's still alive, so he could still change the thing. But I know, granted, there's some gray area there because he sold the rights to let Disney do what they want to do with it, right? But again, if you look at a lot of stuff too, that's a whole nother thing to talk about canon. They're using the term canon as in a story plot progression of this is the main arching story that we all officially are going to try to follow. Right, when we add things around it. That's what they're using for the term canon. I think it's misleading that we have so many versions of the word canon, okay? So when I use the word Tolkien canon, I'm talking about anything that was written or designed or from the brainchild of the original author because that's the definition in the dictionary, okay? On it. Now again, the words evolve over time. They mutate, they transform over time. Words change. So at this time, in the last, but 60 years or so, that's the term I'm using. Now, with that said, we've got really good discussion on this so far. I hope you're enjoying yourself. If you are, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'm enjoying talking about this. Let's talk about what other definitions of canon there are. So, again, we're not talking about fiction now, okay? Let's talk about that real quick here. Give me one moment. All right, so we have a bunch of different definitions of it, and let me just run through it really, really quick. Okay, so this is according to the Merriam-Webster, okay? And this is just the word canon. And it even says the word canon has multiple meanings, including, all right, here's one of them, church law or decree, a statement or set of statements about faith or morals that church members must follow, okay? So that's a different kind of canon. Now, there's similarities there, I guess, if you're saying like, well, God ordained this scripture, so you can't change it because this is canon of the scriptures, right? So that has a similarity to the more transformed version we use for made-up stories and sci-fi fan fiction and stuff like that. So that's kind of where that came out of, I think. But then we also have the official list. It says unofficial lists, such as books of the Bible. Okay, again, it really kind of leans heavily into religious, which is where the word kind of originally originated from. Okay, that's why we're talking about this, so we can kind of deep dive into this whole subject a little more. Accepted standard or rule. Okay, an accepted standard or rule, such as canons of good taste, all right, which is a weird way it describes it. But again, you can see why there's so many meanings, which could get very confusing with people all throwing the term canon around. So, it's canon, it's canon. That's why whenever you hear me talk about canon in my videos, I'm so specific on what I'm trying to tell you about it, and I usually describe it in a little more detail, especially if I'm reviewing a adaptation, whether it be TV show, movie, video game, whatever we're doing with Lord of the Rings here. All right, text and religious authorities accept. The texts and religious authorities accept and regard as scripture. This one kind of works like the first one, sort of, right? It's what they officially, acknowledge or whatever. This one is kind of, I think, where more of the idea of canon, like whoever owns it, comes in. Where it kind of evolved off this meaning for, like, again, a lot of people would consider, well, whoever owns the rights can change the canon. A lot of people argue that for Star Wars. I think it's a word game that is not relevant. I think we should use a different thing. I think we should use, like, the main storyline is now changed because Disney wants it this way. Instead of using the canon has been changed because Disney wants. You see why that could be it can be a very divisive, I think, conversation too, and people really get, like, way too upset over this stuff. But I do want to also kind of, stick up for the fact that, yes, there absolutely is Tolkien Canon. That is objectively the fact, okay? It just means when it comes to the fact of how someone's using the word in that moment, that's where it's hard, right? It's hard to know exactly what someone was using in that moment, that kind of stuff, okay? All right, the vestments prescribed by canon, some other thing they have here, and again, it goes on and on. There's a couple other things too, but that is the original, like, meanings of canon. But again, what I'm talking about in this video is there real Tolkien canon, and the version of what fantasy, when you mean by the canon of a fantasy story or a sci-fi fiction, whatever it is, something written, okay, a story, because that word kind of evolved. And again, let me read that original definition that we're using for the video one more time. The canon of a work or fiction is the body of works taking place in a particular fictional world that are widely considered to be the official or authoritative, especially those created by the original author or developer of the world. That's the version we are using. That's the version that I wish everybody would use, because that's the one that's in the dictionary when it comes to fiction. Okay? So, but everyone can have their own opinions, and I'm not going after anybody. Okay? I'm having a fun conversation with you guys right now. With that said, now I would like to talk real quick to you about how I approach all stuff with Tolkien in particular and canon. Okay? So again, I approach canon being whatever Christopher Tolkien worked on, or mainly his father, J.R.R. Tolkien, made with his mind, designed the world. This even means if it's something that contradicts itself. And some people use that as an argument that there's not a real canon because of that. That's where the whole idea of the linear canon comes in, okay? That's why I'm trying to give you two patterns of thought here, okay? And why I think people get so confused, and why I'm trying to make that premise for you. I believe, from my own views and thoughts, and what the dictionary definition of it with fantasy is that anything that Tolkien thought of, wrote, whether it's notes, whatever, that's canon. I would consider published works the level of canon, okay? So let's do, now that we have this idea, let me give you my ideas and levels of what this stuff is. So at the top, we have anything Tolkien wrote and published, or his son, then published. Those are the gold standard, right? Anything Tolkien wrote, that's canon, okay? Then under that, we have all of Tolkien's notes. We have everything he ever thought, even things that contradicted, or maybe he said, in the future, I might actually change this if I get to it. He said that. Some of his notes, I don't really like this, really, how I did this in the original story, which would be his canon. I'm going to change it. Boop, later, possibly. Well, he never wrote anything different. So unfortunately, we're left with what he originally published and wrote, okay? Which isn't unfortunate, because it's all amazing. So that would be the top, okay? And on a side note, for example, I know I already talked to you about this, but with the who could change canon at this point, we can't really change Lord of the Rings canon at this point. The only stuff we have is the published works and any of his notes or thoughts on it or interviews he had with, and again, I would consider Christopher Tolkien in that group. Normally, I wouldn't consider a family member. I just consider the original author. But since Christopher Tolkien did so much work and also kind of worked with his father while he was alive for years on it and loved his father's works, I feel like he's part of what Tolkien did. And I'm pretty sure that Tolkien would probably agree with us himself on that. But again, we don't know Tolkien's mind. We only know his published works. That's how we can know his mind. That's it, right? We can't directly ask him yet about this stuff unless we go to heaven. And again, I believe he would agree that his son worked so hard that that would be considered official too, and that he put the rest of his father's notes together. Now, it is sad because we really can't get more canon, but it doesn't mean we can't add other things, which is the next layer that I approach the entire world of Lord of the Rings with, okay? And also, like, for just a side note, J.K. Rowling, who does Harry Potter, if she decided that she was going to change something in the original story and she republished a new version of the book, I would consider that that's a canon change. She can do that. She is the original author. She's still alive. She has the rights to do that, right? Now, maybe we wouldn't like it. Maybe we'd like the original version. Sure, that's fine. It just means then I would say the new top level would be her most recent published work, right? It doesn't mean that her original thoughts wouldn't still be a type of alternate canon because she wrote them. You guys, are you following me on this? Do you guys see where this is going? Hopefully I haven't lost you. If you're still here in the video, thank you. So now, the next thing. Tolkien's published works and what his son did. Under that would be their notes and any interviews. We said that already. Then, the next thing I call is legends. Now, this is kind of similar to how some people say with Star Wars, but what I do for the term legends is basically anything that fits into Middle-earth and respects Tolkien. Okay, this would be like, for me personally, the Lord of the Rings online MMO does this fantastically well. The Return to Moria team did this fantastically well. They put stories in, fill in holes where they used original canon. They used original canon stuff. They put that in as much as they could, and where they had to fill in holes or what was respectful, they put in, they mixed in as bridges and stuff in the story or slight adjustments because it's a video game or because it's a movie or TV show. Same thing with Peter Jackson. He did this really well too, right? There's stuff he added or changed, or he'll take a line and give it to another character, things like that. Sure, that wasn't canon because he changed a line, but it fit well. It respected Tolkien, right? I call this legends, okay? So that's how I approach it. I call those legends. They're really good things. Now, in Star Wars, it's slightly different how some people use legends. It's more like original canon that had been taken away by Disney. They call legends. That's a little different way of doing it, just so you guys know. That's not how I approach the Tolkien stuff, okay? I call legends as anything that someone extra writes that isn't original canon, but fits really well, respects Tolkien, and maybe Tolkien himself would like. Again, we don't know his mind, and I am not an authoritative figure on being the hammer that decides this, okay? So again, I'm just giving you my thoughts now. So that would be legends. The next one under that I call fan fiction. All right, this is like the lowest level. This is the most not that, perfectly. So for example, for me, fan fiction would be anything that either respects or maybe disrespects Tolkien in certain ways. Now, I'm just going to throw out there, for example, my character Zolan Ironchild, my persona, my dwarf that I've made up. I have fit him into the story of Middle-earth with some of the real original canon characters like Thorin Oakenshield and the other dwarves. Kind of like how, I would say Lothar does it really well with like a Legends version of fitting you into the original story of canon. But fan fiction would be something fun and maybe doesn't really work, but it's fun, it's still respectful. Or maybe it's just crazy and they're just using names and locations and it's really not following any of the original canon whatsoever. It may even contradict the canon here and there. That kind of stuff, that would be a fan fiction too in my mind. And that would be something, you could have goods or bads in it. But if it's contradicting Tolkien, personally for me, it's a bad thing, okay? So when it comes to this, and I don't want to be controversial about this, but there's parts of the Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power series that I liked and I didn't like. And there are definitely parts so let me just say this without being too mean. There are definitely not very many canon moments in the Rings of Power series, okay? There's some things that are canon, like some location names, some people's names, right? Some events that happen are a little bit canonish. Some might fall into legends, but the majority of, for me personally, this could be different for you, okay? And again, I'm not saying this to hate on anything. I'm just using what I feel and I thought when I watched it, okay? And I have videos reviewing it separately, so we're not going to go into detail with the Rings of Power stuff, but it basically comes down to the fact that a lot of it for me is a fan fiction, which means you can enjoy some of it. Some of it's very entertaining and very good. There's some things that contradict the original canon, like dramatically, or something that I just know doesn't fit into the world, right? And a majority of us know, right? For example, for me, the Mithril story, how Mithril was made in Rings of Power, it's so out there. And there's so many reasons it kind of goes against the original lore. And like, for example, just the fact that they said a Balrog's essence and a High Elven essence fused, and that's why the Mithril's so powerful. Tolkien didn't like making it where evil seemed like it had lots and lots of like good power in some way. It was always bad power. It was always evil, right? He has a lot of gray areas in the story for good reason, because that's good storytelling, but there's definitely some clear good and evil going on in Middle-earth. We all know this from, and I'll make lore videos more on this, and I have some already, on the lore playlist if you want to check it out as well. But really it comes down to the fact that the Mithril story, making it because it's so powerful, because it had a Balrog essence of evil, an evil Maiar, blah, blah, blah. Tolkien, I don't think, would have liked that. Now, again, I can't speak for Tolkien, even though I want to be a voice for Tolkien, right? And there is a difference there, okay? I want to be respectful to Tolkien. I want to point out how good his works are and talk about what his canon is, right? What canon is for Tolkien, what he wrote, and push that this is canon. Tolkien does really have a canon, okay? We must respect that. It's Tolkien. We have to respect Tolkien. It's what he wrote. But obviously I can't speak for him on things that he never spoke on. Right? That's what I mean by that. Those are the two differences, what I was trying to say. So anyway, with that talked about, all right, and covered, I would like to just kind of finish up with the fact that, so there's not necessarily anything bad or good about all, like, canon is always good. Legends is usually something that's a positive. Technically, I guess you could put something into Legends category, but I just for me, Legends is anything that isn't the original author's creation, but fits in super well. And then fan fiction is what we just described for the last 3 or 4 minutes here. All right. So that's how I approach it. Those are my thoughts. Those are not definitions, okay? The beginning of the video was the definitions of what's factual there on that, okay? But again, the reason I talked about all this today, the reason I really wanted to get to the bottom of this whole conversation about canon is that, again, it is really, really confusing for a lot of, I see it with a lot of my viewers, and I understand it's confusing because people are throwing around the term willy-nilly, and people are using different versions of the word canon because has a lot of different versions, okay? And, but I'm someone who I like to show the premise I'm talking about, show the definitions in the dictionary, and then break it down from there. That's what I always will try to do in this channel. I want to be fair. I want to be fair to all sides on things. Again, I even want to be fair to, the Rings of Power people. I know there are parts of Rings of Power that made me a little, I like, that was horrible. Why did they do that, right? Like, I get angry about it. But at the same time, there's some good things too. And I know that, there's different things that get mixed into stories, and sometimes like agendas will get pushed into a new series or stuff like that. I try to ignore those things. You're all adults. You know about those things if you already have a certain viewpoint in your life or whatever. I want everyone to feel welcome here on the channel, so I just don't get into that because it's not important. We're talking about the canon here. But it doesn't mean that I won't be afraid to say I like something or afraid to say I don't like something, because as a Tolkien content creator, I'm going to do that. Now, I am always open to talk to anyone about this stuff. So no matter who it is, right? Again, if Corey Olsen wanted to talk about it and do a view or a live stream on it, I'd be down, right? I'd be down to talk to anyone on the Rings of Power team about and ask these questions. And again, They would be hard questions, right? Because we might end the conversation with agreeing to disagree on something, but at least we had a good constructive conversation. Because a lot of conversations today are people just putting up walls at each other and yelling at each other, right? And I think we all get tired of that. That's not the point of this, okay? And again, with my way of approaching it, it doesn't mean that we can't have fun fan fiction versions. If some people like The Rings of Power, awesome. I just want people to know that a lot of stuff was changed from the original canon. There are some stuff in Rings of Power that you could probably fit into Legends, and there's a few little tiny spots here and there that you could fit into the original canon, right? But that's what really, I think, bothers a lot of us Tolkien, like, long-time readers and stuff. We really wanted to see, for example, for me personally with Rings of Power, I would have liked to see 90% original canon and 10% to 20% them filling in things, because you have to do that. Because, again, there's a lot of storyline in that area, but not enough for like 5 seasons. You would have to have other plot lines, other made-up characters. By the way, some of the made-up characters are my favorite characters in the entire Rings of Power series. Just pointing that out. So, again, all of this is really important to remember with conversation. And I am just someone on this channel that I will always be very respectful to all sides, all views on things, but I'm going to give you my views. I will give you the facts and the definitions of the dictionary, and then I will tell you and make sure you understand that these are my thoughts and my opinions, okay, on the other side of things, which is what we did in this video. The beginning was talking about the facts and breaking it down and the definition version of canon. Then I told you about how I approach it, which I use canon being my own, Legends being the next thing that I made up, kind of added, and Fanfictions, which in those order. And then I already told you kind of how I approach them with the different levels. And again, I really think it comes down to the published works of Tolkien are the original canon, solid, but anything Tolkien and his son Christopher did with notes or anything are all technically canon. And no, absolutely not. You cannot add canon if you're not Tolkien or his son. All right? In the definition of the dictionary version with storytelling, sci-fi, fantasy, and fiction. Okay? You just can't. All right? And I know some people will disagree with me. Some people will be like, no, it's whoever owns it can change it now. That's just fine. I would consider those things real things too. If someone owns it, they have the right to change it, like Star Wars. But that would be more of a linear story progression of the original. It would, and you'd be using the original canon and then adding your own story to continue it. Or if you adjust something, that's adjusted to your own new story. You took out the original canon and put your own thing in. Then maybe you're doing it like Legends, right? You're making it where it respects the original lore, but you decided to switch something. But I personally feel like when it comes to Tolkien, no changes to his original lore is the most respectful way to do things. Do I think that there's sometimes room for slight adjustments when it comes to a video game or a movie or a TV show? Absolutely. I think that people get way too uptight about it. I think Tolkien himself gives us beautiful examples of this when it comes to that one guy who wanted to make a play of his in his notes of The Lord of the Rings, but he's like, I can't fit this into an hour and a half play. And Tolkien was like, yeah, well, tell you what, just remove all of Rohan, get rid of Theoden, Éomer, and Éowyn, and you should be able to get the main plot of the story, and that'll work. Tolkien said that. Now, that just like, my heart, because I love the Rohirrim, right? That's like one of the best parts of Lord of the... I mean, obviously I'm a dwarf guy. Dwarves are the best. But I know, I love all the races of Middle-earth. I love all the story plots. They're amazing. So that just like kills me. But it just goes to show you Tolkien understood that he had his published works. They're not going to mess with his published works. As long as they try to stay truthful to his story and true to his story. You know, they take up Rohan to try to fit it into a play that's only an hour and a half. Fine, right? And I know there's some other plays that do that today. They have to take out certain things in the original books. Of course. Peter Jackson had to do that in a lot of the stories. Of course. The difference is with Peter Jackson's 85 to 90% of his movies were canon and chronological to the original story, right? And then they changed some stuff around, moved, cut some stuff out, a lot of stuff. Tom Bombadil, Glorfindel, you get it, right? So they cut stuff out. But then again, when it comes to Rings of Power, and again, I don't hate anybody, right? Okay? I don't hate people. We have to love people, okay, guys? All right? Follow Jesus' example, okay? Love other people, all right? Just moving on at that. But it doesn't mean that we can't criticize. There's like constructive criticism and being, if you're not blindly just blaring mean things at someone. It's really, really important to actually have a conversation about these things and talk about it. And maybe you agree to disagree on things, right? Maybe you're someone that's just adamantly, you'll never watch The Rings of Power and you just don't like it. That's totally fine. That's your opinion, right? And I'm in the same boat of where I'm kind of like, I'm watching it because I'm reviewing it for my channel, but there's a lot of stuff I don't like. There's some stuff I like, and some people love it tremendously, and I'm so glad that you like it. But just keep in mind, to the people even who love it, that it is an original Tolkien canon. And when it comes to what are we gonna, if we make another movie series after, before, whatever, are they gonna have to use the Rings of Power story plots? No, because those are kind of their own thing. They have nothing to do with the original canon. All right. I think we had a nice long fireside chat here today, my friends. I hope that you guys enjoyed this. Again, I just always want to be super respectful on the channel to everybody and everyone's thoughts. And I know we have many diverse views in this world, okay? And the bottom line is we have to realize that sometimes we'll have to agree to disagree on things. That's just the bottom line. And if you're someone who loves something or someone that hates something, you can validly have those opinions. One thing that I always said with the Rings of Power series is there were two extreme boats. One boat really, really hated it. And they were like, how dare you even watch it? How dare you even support it? Blah, 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 right? That's one boat. The other boat was like, it's the best thing ever. And if you say it's wrong in any way, you're a horrible human being. Not everybody did that. But these are the extreme camps. These are the little tiny fringe minorities, right? It's not the majority of us viewers of Tolkien, right? I always said that they're both wrong. And the problem was, that what I would say is they can both have those opinions. They have freedom of speech. They can have those opinions, but don't try to force everyone else to have those opinions. That's where they were wrong in those extremes, right? They would basically say, you should all be doing this. No, people can decide what they want to do, right? Or whatever degree. If you're someone kind of like me in the middle where I'm like, well, I really didn't like this, but this I enjoyed, that kind of thing. I think that's where a lot of people sit. But again, I'm not speaking for everyone else. I'm speaking for me, voice of the Rings. Okay, and I want to be a voice for Tolkien on this whole subject. So again, I know I talked a little bit more here about Rings of Power at the end than I kind of wanted to go into, because I wanted to mainly focus on canon, but it's the best example right now in this time and why this has been such a huge thing for the last few months with conversations, because again, I feel like people are just throwing around this word and being mean to each other, and it's like, at the end of the day, if you don't like it, don't watch it, right? But it is kind of hard for some of us, because you could argue the other point of, well, we would have liked the original, like the original canon. That's where I kind of cringe, right? And get frustrated, because I'm in the boat of, well, it's not that I'm necessarily angry of this new story plot or fan fiction, as I like to call it. It's that we could have had if we had followed the original thing. And then some people argue, well, they didn't have the rights to everything. That is true. But the problem is, a lot of the rights they did have to things, they changed. Or they thought, well, I think Tolkien meant it like this. Which, again, is valid in their case. I disagree, personally. But that's, they can do what they want with that, too, right? And again, they do have the rights. They got the rights to make a show. Now, I've noticed a couple things here and there, where it seems like they put Silmarillion in there, which I didn't think they had the rights to the Silmarillion, but maybe it's just there's some overlap, because the appendices they have the rights to does have a little overlap with Silmarillion's of the story of the original stuff, so yeah. But with that, my friends, you have a great and wonderful day in Middle-earth. I would love to hear your opinions in the comments. Please like and subscribe. It would be wonderful. This was a very, very fun talk. Hopefully you are now a little more enlightened to the definition of canon, because my biggest thing in making this video was to give you guys a solid dictionary definition of the canon when it in regards to fantasy. Okay. And again, there is some justification to say, well, canon is kind of a loose term and a lot of people are using it in many different ways. Absolutely. That is definitely happening too. But from the premise that I started at the beginning of this video, without my own thoughts and feelings into the situation, right? And the dictionary definition, canon is anything but the brainchild of the original author. All right? That's how you can think about it. And again, you could say, well, they have contradictions, the original author. If he does, they're all still canon. It's just really what you'd go on is the most recent version, whatever they wrote, is the most story-driven straight line of what he wanted, the author. Okay? So there's multiple There could be multiple versions of canon, right? If it's all the same author who thought of these different versions in the story. Now, I have some family members and friends who are also authors and writers of fiction and fantasy. So this is something that I know they do too. Their stories change constantly. And someone I've read their book a few times, and the book has changed several times already. Not the main core story, but a lot of big things have been changed over time. So that definitely happens with the original author can do that. They can change canon. Nobody else can change canon. And again, like I said at the beginning of the video, some people are going to say, well, it's whoever owns it can change the canon. Or whoever has the right to do something, they can change canon. That's just fine. I disagree with that definition. But again, that's the whole word game that I tried to break down in this video for you guys, and why I think that, yes, there is absolutely, unequivocally, Tolkien Canon in Middle-earth. Absolutely. Solid Tolkien Canon. There's really no way of getting around it in any of the word games when it comes to the definition of that I brought up with our dictionary here. Okay? We good? Nice. And again, you can disagree with me. That's absolutely just fine. But that's the fun part. That's the fun part of life, and that should be the fun part of this whole conversation with Lord of the Rings stuff and things. And again, just to distinguish two different things, if people are mad about something in a story or a plot because they feel like an agenda or something was put into a story, that is not what I'm talking about right now. Okay, I'm directly talking about just people writing stories with the definition, with canon versus what they might make up. Okay, that's a whole different thing when it comes to people putting in their ideas. Something if people are mad about that, that's an entirely separate thing. And unfortunately, those tend to mix because naturally. But that's not what I was talking about in this video. We're just talking about the definition of canon and fantasy. So with that, my friends, I think I did that justice. I went much longer than I was expecting in this video. If you got to the end, you're amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you to my Patreons for their support. I could not do it without you guys. I do this full time, so thank you. And this is not the main stuff I do. I do enjoy these fireside chats and conversations, but this is not the main stuff I do. I do voiceovers in Lord of the Rings Online. I do different guides for games. I do lore videos. I do collectible reviews. Lots of other fun stuff. Check it out. Like and subscribe. And then thank you to my Reb for being a royal guardian, supporting the channel, and all of my other Patreons. And you guys watching, liking. You're my valiant fellowship, my valiant clan here on Voice of the Rings is what I call my viewers. Have a great and wonderful day in Middle-earth and stay happy. I'm at your service and your family. Solon Ironshield, Baruch Hazard, Kuzad, I menu. I'll see you in the next one, guys.